Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. Thank you for having us. Thank you for being here. It really is great. We hear a lot about CEF from Andrew and Claire, so it's good to actually be here. This morning, as Andrew said, you'll see on the screen, we're talking about the gospel for every child. With my background in studying theology and Jenny's background of being a special needs teacher, really as we come together, we've got a heart for reaching all children, and particularly those with behavioural needs. Last summer, we went out to the United States, and we spent a few weeks over there. And what we wanted to see a ministry where this was being put in place really well. And as we went over to LA. And we were a little bit nervous that going over to America, it's bigger, they've got more resources, everything seems to be better over there. And we were a little bit fearful that as we went to America, we would see really great things. But then when we come back to little Northern Ireland, well, we're not able to implement those things. And we were actually really, thankfully, surprised at what we saw. Because what they do over there, it is bigger, but it's not unachievable. All they did over there, they've got their clubs and all the things that we have, and they've just made little changes, little tweaks to accommodate and help those with behavioural needs. And so as we came back, we were really encouraged because we're not saying that you need to rip up your program and start afresh. All we're saying is in order to help those with behavioural needs, it's little small tweaks that we all have to make to our clubs. And so today we're going to think about how do we do that? How do we best understand the behaviour that we come across in our clubs? We are going to talk in the context of clubs. So whether that's a 5-day club, holiday Bible club, good news club, but lots of what we're going to talk about, the content's going to be transferable to wherever you are, whether it's a camp, whether it's your church, or wherever you find yourself in. We want to say right at the outset, we're not going to give you a magical formula so that you can apply and that every child is going to behave the way you want them to behave. I hope you know that is unrealistic. This is a really complex issue. There are lots and lots of layers to it. And so our aim is to help you understand the different behavior that you might come across. And then we're going to think very practically, well, what do we do? What strategies can we implement to help with those needs? And so you'll see on the screen really where we're going to go. We're going to firstly think biblically about why should we even think about this? Why should this be in our conversation? Then Jenny's going to come in and help us understand behavior a little bit more from her experience as a special needs teacher. And then finally, we're going to spend most of our times thinking very practically. Well, what are practical tools or practical steps that we can all implement into our context to make the gospel accessible for all? I want to say at the end, we're going to try anyway to leave time for a Q&A. And so if there's something maybe that we say and you want a little bit more clarity about, or you just want to ask a follow-up question, keep that in your head, and at the end we'll have time that you can ask those questions. And so let's think biblically first of all. Why should we talk about this? Why should we have conversations about having the gospel for every child? And I think it's important right at the outset that we make clear that at the start of the Bible in Genesis, we're told that every child is made in the image of God. And so that means that every child has a dignity, that they've got a worth, and they've got a value. No matter how they behave in your clubs, they've all got value. And so I want to start off with a question. I'm going to give you 1 minute. I want you to talk to the person beside you. And I want you to think about this question. What does inclusion look like in the Bible? What does inclusion look like in the Bible? When we look at the Bible, what kinds of people do we see God includes? Or if you think very practically of the New Testament, who do you see Jesus interacting with? And so I'll give you 1 minute. You can talk to the person beside you. Okay, so keep that in your head. Keep that in your head. When we read our Bibles, I think time and time again, we see that God is not interested in the strong and in the able and in the impressive individuals. Those people who, if we're honest, they're probably the people that we are drawn to or we perhaps place more value on. And yet whenever we step back in Scripture and we look at Scripture as a whole, we see actually God is interested in the total opposite. And so I want you to keep those people or the answer to your question in your head. And I want to offer you three categories of people and see if you've been able to match any of these categories of people that we see in the Bible. And so, first one, we see that God is interested in the weak and the vulnerable. God is interested in the weak and the vulnerable. If you think of the Old Testament, you think of the nation of Israel, God's chosen people. Deuteronomy chapter 7 tells us that God did not choose them because they were great, not because they were the biggest, not because they were the most impressive. The Bible tells us that God chose them because that's who he chose. That's who he put his steadfast love upon. In fact, there were other nations that were more impressive, and yet that's not who God chose. He chose Israel. You think how often the Bible speaks about orphans. It talks about how God has love for the orphans and the widows of the world. We see that through the Old Testament. Psalm 68 tells us that God is a father to the fatherless. He cares about the weak and the vulnerable. You think about the New Testament, Jesus in Mark 10, when the people are bringing children to him and the disciples push them away, telling them, don't distract Jesus, that they're not worth Jesus' time. Well, how does Jesus respond? He rebukes them, doesn't he? He says, let the children come to me. Time and time again, throughout Scripture, we see God has a heart for those who are weak and those who are vulnerable. But we also see that God has got a heart for those who are maybe considered as an outsider or an outcast in society. I think it's striking, whenever you read the New Testament, it's striking how many times we see Jesus spending time with people that perhaps many of us, we wouldn't want to spend time with. Time again, we see Jesus spending time with those who are in the fringes of society, who sit on the edges, the sick, those who are excluded, those who are deemed untouchable by society. You think about the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. Samaritans were hated by the Jews. Women were not held in high regard in society. And so this individual, not only was she a Samaritan, and not only was she a woman, she's also a Samaritan woman with a very messy and very complicated past. This is a kind of person that society would push to the outside, that they don't give time to. And yet we see Jesus, doesn't he go out of his way, and he speaks to this woman and he spends time with her. You think about the lepers throughout Scripture, those people who were isolated, who very much had to live on the outside of society. People would have avoided them. People would totally cut them off. And yet what does Jesus do? He goes and speaks to them. And he interacts with them and he heals them. And so we see that in these few examples, Jesus spends time, he cares about the outsider and the outcast. Thirdly, we see the sinner. The sinner, this is very closely connected. How Jesus interacts with people who are known for their sin. Think about tax collectors. They were not just unpopular in society. They were despised. They were absolutely hated. And yet Luke chapter 5, Jesus eats with them. He eats with tax collectors. That's not something you do. And yet Jesus cares. He cares for the sinner. Let me give you one more example. Think of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19, a man that everybody had written off, a man that everybody hated. Nobody wanted to be around him. And Jesus says to him, I must stay at your house. That is not the normal response to Zacchaeus. Jesus deliberately moves towards the morally messy people, those who are written off, those who other people had given up on. Those people who aren't deemed good enough to have Jesus' time. And so I hope very simply you can see this pattern, that time and time again, God and Jesus spend time with the weak, with the vulnerable, the outsider, the outcast, the sinner, those people who society don't deem worthy enough. And yet we see God shows a love for them. And so I think as Christians, if this is who God cares about, and we clearly see that in Scripture, well, then I think all of us have a responsibility that we must also care about them. So with that said, it is our aim today to see every child reached with the gospel, every child, little changes to our clubs so that they can know Jesus as their Savior. And so I'm going to ask Jenny if she would come and help us just think through a little bit how we can understand behaviour in our clubs.
Okay, so I wonder, when you hear behaviour, what do you think, or what scenarios come to your mind? I'm not going to be as generous as James. I'm only going to give you 30 seconds because I just want you to think, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when I say, what is behaviour? So 30 seconds, talk to the person beside you, and hopefully we'll get some words shouted back in a wee minute, okay? Okay, let me bring you back in, and I'm going to just take one kind of word from each of the sections. So anybody over here want to shout out something that comes to mind when I say, what is behaviour? Anybody brave enough? Yeah, go for it. Oh, sorry. What is it? Expectations, yeah, absolutely. Anything from this section? Distracting, yeah. This section?
Trouble.
Okay, so it's helpful to see what comes to mind when we think of behaviour. I'm sure we do all know children and have experience working with children who perhaps have been labelled difficult, need reined in, or maybe is one to watch. And it's true, some children do present with more challenging behaviour, and this can make running a club, children's ministry, or even camp very difficult. However, the difficulty is not with the child, or even in blaming the parents. Some children, particularly those with statements of special educational needs, can present with more challenging behaviours that are very complex. So let's try and begin to unpack this further. What is behaviour? Something you may have already heard and will most likely hear me repeat today is all behaviour is a form of communication. For many children with special educational needs, they can display challenging or more unusual behaviours. There is always a reason for challenging behaviour. In many cases, it's a way for a child or young person to control what is going on around them or to simply have their needs met. They also might be ill or in pain or want to get something that is not accessible or available to them. It's important to understand the reasons behind the challenging behaviour and what the behaviour is really trying to tell us. Another thing to keep in mind about behaviour is all behaviour has a function. Simply put, behaviour can often be about getting something or avoiding something. So let's look at some of these functions of behaviour. And if it's helpful, try and remember the word EATS. So, the functions of behaviour. E is for escape. Behaviour may be a way of avoiding something a child does not like. Maybe the activity feels too hard, too overwhelming, or they're not sure what to do. So they disengage, distract, act out. Sometimes children will even try to physically escape or run off. And what they're really saying is, this is too much for me. Our next letter is A for attention. Behaviour may be their most effective way of getting someone's attention, whether that's from an adult or a child, even if it seems negative, such as shouting, interrupting, hitting, or just being silly during a session. Really, the behaviour is saying, notice me. Our next letter is T for tangible. Children may have learnt certain behaviours as a way of getting something they want, whether that be food, a toy, a turn in the quiz, they want to be first in line, or they want to choose the game. Really, the behaviour is saying, I want that. S is for sensory. Sometimes children enjoy the feedback some behaviours can give them, such as constantly moving, rocking, making noises, humming, repeating phrases, or touching everything, all those things that you might be thinking are troublesome or distracting. Really, the behaviour is saying, this helps me cope. We also must not forget that many children with SEN can have a range of additional needs. At times, behaviour can be linked to pain, illness, tiredness, or even anxiety. Often behaviour is a sign that something deeper is going on, which is really saying something's not right. It can be very easy, especially in a club setting, to focus on the behaviour itself and want an instant fix to help things run smoother. A simple way to think of behaviour and to try and understand it more, This is something we do in a school setting, so it is a bit more technical, but particularly when we are recording and monitoring behaviour, it's helpful to think of the ABC framework for behaviour. So firstly, A. A stands for antecedent, or the action before. So what triggered the behaviour? What set it off? Where were they? When did it happen? Who was there? What was the environment like? B stands for behaviour. What is the behaviour itself? What do you actually see happening? What did the child do? Who was involved? And how long did it last? Finally, C is for consequence. What happened afterwards? How did the situation escalate? How did you intervene? What changed in the child's environment? And what was the response? So instead of wanting an instant fix to the behaviour, it is more helpful to see that the situation is deeper than the behaviour present. Instead, we need to ask, what has triggered this behaviour? And whether it's in your holiday Bible club, your kids club, or your children's ministry week to week, there can be some common triggers in church or club settings. And often what looks like defiance can be confusion, anxiety, or just a feeling of overwhelm. Children can feel overstimulated through noise, games, lots happening at one time. There can also be a lack of clarity in our clubs. For many children, it's a new environment. It's unknown surroundings. Many of us assume knowledge or awareness of what a church club looks like, or simply the child is saying, I don't know what to do. Finally, transitions. This can be one of the biggest triggers for behaviour. Moving from one activity to another can be very difficult for many children to process without clear instructions and supports in place. Children and many adults thrive on consistency and predictability. We all like to feel in control. We like to know what's coming next, and we all like routine. Therefore, it is important that in our clubs and children's ministries, there are clear expectations, consistent responses, and regular routines in place. When children know what is coming next and what is expected, behaviour is often reduced or improved before we even have to implement any specific strategies. We are only scratching the surface today in understanding behaviour. This takes training, experience, and time. And if I'm really honest, even for me in my job, it requires a lot of learning on the go. But hopefully today you can already see how even a small shift in our thinking towards behaviour can help our children feel safer, more able to cope, and just more included in our clubs. Don't get me wrong, this is not about excusing behaviour. It is about understanding the behaviour so that we can respond wisely, and in particular when we're dealing with children with special educational needs or those who present more challenging behaviour. It's about understanding the behaviour itself and wanting to work alongside children and young people, even if they have a statement of special educational needs. So to conclude this section on understanding behaviour, don't just ask, how do I stop this behaviour? Instead, let's be asking, what is this child trying to communicate to me? I know that was a whistle-stop tour through behaviour, and you probably have a lot more questions. We'll get to those at the end. Sorry, that didn't come up. What is this child trying to communicate to me? So our next section we're going to look at is the practical tools. We know that all behaviour is a form of communication. So in this next section, we're going to learn how we can respond to that well. And the goal of all our clubs and children's ministries is to make the gospel accessible to every child. You don't need to change your club entirely, as we've already said, but small, simple changes can make a big difference. As Sandra Peoples says in her book, Accessible Church, inclusion isn't about doing more, it's about doing things differently. I'm going to hand back to James, and together we're going to walk through some elements of a typical club and look at simple, practical ways to help every child feel included in our clubs, as well as suggesting some practical resources to help those in particular with special educational needs. So I'll invite James to come back up, and he's going to talk through the first element of our clubs.
Okay, so I hope you can see that although this is a quite a daunting topic, maybe it is challenging that you found in whatever setting you are, I hope you can see that with little tweaks and with little changes, a change in mindset, this is actually accessible. And so we're going to walk through some practical things that we all do in our clubs, and let's think about how can we make these more. And so let's think about the games. Every club loves games. All kids love games, and we're not saying you're not allowed to do games anymore. What we're saying, you'll see on the screen, a helpful way is to make the game more visible. Okay, don't just verbally explain or don't just verbally give out instruction, but make it more visible. Some of the challenges that you might come across, or children with these behavioural needs will come across in games, is chaos. So chaos is difficult to manage, which they're probably not the only individuals who struggle with that. Competition can be difficult, trying to compete against one another, and waiting in turns. If you have a game where maybe only one person is taking part at one time and everyone else has to sit back and wait, that can be challenging. And so let's think about some strategies in our games that we can do. And we see really on the screen there, one of them is that you want to verbally and visibly explain the game. So always model the game. Okay, as you explain the rules, do that visibly. Show them what they're meant to do. Don't just tell them. Show them. Show them the rules of the game. There's on the screen, we're going to see a visual rule card. This here is just helpful. So for children who perhaps struggle verbally to understand, you could print this off and maybe have it on the screen, or you could have it on the wall, or you could hold it, or you could even have a lanyard and you wear it around your neck. And this you'll see on the screen. It doesn't just show them. It doesn't just tell them what to do. That they can visibly see what they're meant to do, and that's just a helpful way for them to understand what this game is about. As I said, try to reduce the waiting time. And so try not to pick games where children are sitting out for 10 minutes and you only get to play for 5. Try and get a game where everybody is involved in the game. There's another visual card that you could have. Again, just helps them to understand this, that it's a my turn and your turn. And so if they do have to wait at times, well, this will help them understand what's taking place. And also think of games that are appropriate for all physical abilities. Sometimes we can have games that are really rough, or games that are quite physically demanding. And that just creates chaos, and that's hard to process and manage. And so maybe it could be helpful to think of opt-out options, where maybe they're not taking part in this actual activity, but there's a way they can help. So can they help with keeping the score? Can they help with keeping time? Can they be a referee or something? Another way to make them included, and so that they're still part of the game. Memory verse, let's think about memory verse. I think memory verse is potentially one of the most important parts of our clubs. And so you'll see on the screen that if they can move it and see it, well, then they can remember it. And this one's probably something that we already do. This is probably relevant for all children, but I think it's helpful for us to be reminded. What are some of the challenges of a memory verse? Well, keeping attention can be hard. Sitting in one space for a while and focusing and listening can be difficult. Maybe children have different literacy abilities, and so maybe they can't read or they can't understand the words that are at the front, and so that just causes confusion and frustration, and that's when we can see these different behavioral patterns. And so let's think, well, what strategies can we do? When we're teaching our memory verses, we're teaching scripture, the very word of God to children. Well, how can we make that more accessible for all? As I said, you probably do a lot of these anyway. I think one helpful way is to break your memory verse into smaller chunks. So if you think about Psalm 23, we're probably familiar with that. As you, instead of teaching maybe the whole first verse, or the whole psalm itself, try and break it into little chunks. And so, the Lord is my shepherd. That's a great truth. That's the first part of the psalm. And so try to break it down. The Lord is my shepherd. Repetition is absolutely key, and I think that's right across life anyway. But repetition is a really helpful way for the child to continue to remember and to learn. Using actions is good. We see that if they can move it, if they can see it, if they can see this verse physically almost being acted out, that's a helpful way for those who maybe can't read or who can't understand verbal instruction that they can see. And so you can try to make up your own actions. or you can try to use Makaton signing. I'm going to ask if Jenny could come and show us "The Lord is my shepherd" in Makaton. I think Makaton can be I think it can be daunting and confusing, but actually there's really great websites where you could just look up YouTube and they show you all of the different words. And so can you show us "The Lord is my shepherd" in Makaton?
Yep. So for this, we can break it into the words and the symbols, and you can use an action for reference. So on the screen you can see a shepherd's holding a crook. But actually, if we're wanting to use Makaton, which is a really helpful communication aid for lots of children with special needs, the sign for shepherd, this is actually sheep. So you kind of get your pinkies and you kind of do your wee curly wool. So it's sheep with a beard. So that's a man, okay? So it's sheep man. So I'm actually going to get everybody to stand up and we'll all do the whole verse together just to give everybody like a wee movement break. So if you watch me first, and then I'll do the whole verse and then we can do it all together. So it goes like this. The Lord is my shepherd. Okay, so we'll do that again. The Lord is my shepherd. And now you know Makaton.
Great. Yeah, I think Makaton, it is logical. The sheep man is a shepherd. And so it's a helpful way. So you could use Makaton, or you could teach the memory verse through visual aids or symbols. And so they're not necessarily reading the words, but they're reading the symbols. And so you can see there, the Lord is my shepherd. There's different symbols there that help the child understand what the words actually are. And I also think a really important one is that we should be celebrating effort and not just perfection. You know, we love to bring children up and, can anybody say it? And we bring it up and they say it in front of everyone else. And that's great. Like we want the children to be able to say the memory verse. But that can be really challenging for some children. And so they never get recognition. And so it's really important that we understand that children all learn at different levels. And so even though they don't come up to the front and say it, if they're making progress, well, that's really important to recognize and celebrate with them. Make other people aware, perhaps, that, Jenny's been able to say, "The Lord is my shepherd," and that's wonderful. And so it's helpful to remember, celebrate effort and not just perfection. In terms of our singing, so singing is a good part of the club. We heard a new song there at the start. And it's helpful to remember, you'll see on the screen, that participation doesn't always look the same. Participation doesn't always look the same. What are some of the challenges when it comes to singing? Well, noise. That can be difficult to process. There can be sensory overload, so lots of noise, lots of children singing, lots of actions. There's so much going on, and that can be distracting, and that can be overwhelming for different individuals. And so those are the challenges. And so what do we do? What are some of the strategies that we can help when it comes to singing? Jenny mentioned earlier about having a predictable structure in our clubs is really important. One good way is maybe always start with the same song or always end with the same song. Maybe the one at the end would be more important because it signals what's coming next. When we sing that song, the club is coming to an end. And so you're communicating through the songs that you choose. Less is more. And so there are so many great songs out there, and we can think that we need to have a playlist of 50 different kids' songs, which means that we never actually sing the same song any time. And so if you're always introducing something new, well, that's hard to process, that's hard to manage. And so less is more. If you can get a bank of good songs and each week maybe sing, same ones, that helps with familiarity and it helps them process those songs. Again, actions are great. We said participation doesn't always look the same. And so some children might not actually sing with words. They might sing through actions. And that is a way to get them involved and help them to participate. My experience of clubs is that we ask, any children want to come up and give actions? And yep. And we have 5 different kids up who all go to 5 different churches or 5 different clubs. And they all know 5 different sets of actions for this song. And so they're all doing their own thing and they're all looking at each other. That is a nightmare. I think it's really important that maybe you use, I think we have a photo of a good video that shows action so everybody's doing the same thing. Or if you can get your leaders up to the front, and not that they're, looking up here trying to copy the actions, get your leaders to know the actions so that everybody's doing the same thing. Again, it's just a bit of continuity. It is really, really helpful. One other helpful thing is a calm corner. And so not just for singing, really for the whole club. If you have the facility to have another room out the side, that's a place where it's calm and it's quiet, that you can remove the child if they want, and they can go into this place away from the noise and all the chaos that goes on. It can be challenging if you don't have another room to go into. Well, maybe, at the back or the front or something, you could have that little section that they know it's safe, that they can sit down and they can just have this time to themselves away from the group. And also, don't force participation. Don't force children. You need to sing. You need to do the actions. Let them go at their own pace. Another helpful thing you can have on your lanyard, you can have a choice card. And so let the child choose, do you want to participate in this? Or do you just want to sit at the calm corner or come to the back and just observe what's taking place? Let that digest. And if you're doing a holiday Bible club, it might be day 3 or 4, and then they want to participate. But give them time to come into this. All these images that we've made for the lanyard, I don't know if I should admit this, they've all been made on ChatGPT. And the reason we've done that, and the reason we want to say that, is because there is software out there. Jenny uses different software in her school, which we don't have access to. But everybody has access to ChatGPT, and they can create these images so easily and so quickly. And so this is accessible for us as leaders to use these things. And so those are the 3, and I'm going to ask Jenny if she'd come back and talk us through another few elements.
I feel like all our secrets are now out and you're all going to be judging us, but ChatGPT is a wonderful resource when used wisely. So when it comes to our Bible lessons, this is one of the main, sometimes elements of our clubs, but often clarity actually reduces anxiety before you even start to speak. And many children experience challenges when it comes to the lesson, whether it's sitting still or just simply processing lots of language at once. So some strategies that we can implement when teaching the Bible lesson is keeping it simple and clear. Most children find it hard to sit for long periods of time, so ensure to be engaging, offer elements of interaction and audience participation, and if wanting to repeat the central truth or repeated storyline, it can be helpful to clap to signal attention and then say your repeated storyline or central truth to reinforce the key teaching point throughout the lesson. But these can also be printed, like this visual here, printed out and given to individuals who will use symbols and words to understand language more. And again, if it's small enough, you're repeating the same story, it can be put on your lanyard. Another thing is to use helpful visuals or objects, something that many of you will do anyway when teaching a lesson. But using props and objects can represent visual aspects of the story and really make it engaging and memorable for all children. If you're feeling brave, you could make your entire lesson a sensory story. So that is just taking key elements of the story and bringing them to life, whether it's through a physical prop, a smell, an image, something that the child can see right in front of them, and it just brings the story to life. And that's something that all children will benefit from, but particularly those who find it hard to sit and listen audibly. Another thing is to build interaction with questions and actions. However, I will say be mindful of some children who take things very literally. So be mindful of rhetorical questions when you're teaching your lesson. If you don't want an answer and you just happen to say something casually in your story, be aware of those children who take things literally and who might repeat that phrase over and over and shout that out and cause a bit more interruption throughout your story. Another thing is to give clear expectations. Whether it's from the front or if a leader is working one-to-one with a child, it can be helpful to state the expectations, such as we're waiting for 5 minutes and then we'll move. And you could also create this in a visual like the screen. It can be a first and then card, which is a really helpful tool to have printed out in front of you or again on a lanyard. And this is really helpful to create a calm space before you even start your lesson. The child knows this is what's happening and this is what's coming next. And it's important to gain every child's attention before you begin. And give all children clear instructions of what is about to happen and how you would like the children to behave during the lesson. Don't just assume that every child knows how to sit and listen to an entire story. Finally, when it comes to lessons, keep it short. So if you've said we're sitting for 5 minutes, then we'll move, you got to keep to your time. So if you're feeling really brave, it could be helpful for some children to have a visual countdown on the screen. That puts a lot of pressure on you, but you could put a visual countdown on the screen to let them know how long they have left to wait. Or a leader working one-to-one with the child can have a visual, it's probably hard to see there, but it's a visual strip and it counts down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Or you can have a sand timer, and those can just be purchased on Amazon. You can get 5-minute, 10-minute ones, whatever you need. And it just helps the child to visually see the time and how long is left. The next element of our clubs then is quizzes and activities. So when it comes to these, we want to lower the pressure and increase participation. Some of the challenge can be the pressure on children or fear of getting it wrong. So some strategies then to help in this area can be multiple choice. So it can be helpful to have questions that give multiple choice answers, which can be easier to understand and remove those assumptions or expectations on children and assuming they will repeat exactly the answer that you are expecting. So like on the screen there, we have A, B, C. And again, you can have symbols, you can have words, just keep it really visual. We also then can have visual answering. So it's important to allow non-verbal responses in our clubs, whether that's pointing, using answer cards or objects. We can include an element of movement. And this is actually stolen from Andrew McNabb, but you can have 3 chairs and that can be your A, B and C, and they have to walk to the visual chair to represent their answer. Or you can simply do yes and no, thumbs up, or you can hold up a green card and a red card, just thinking how we can make it more visual and use less language. Another thing is team-based answering, so also removing the pressure from an individual child, but encouraging peers to help other children and to ensure all of our children feel included in our clubs, no matter their listening or answering ability. This is something a little bit different, but when it comes to your activities, whether that's a workbook or worksheet, something like an errorless learning activity can be really beneficial. So this is something that reinforces the central truth of your lesson, but it removes the expectation of getting the answer right. So again, on the screen, it says, who died on the cross, which is Jesus. So rather than having lots of answers and confusion, all they have to do is they have to cut and stick or have a visual there and place that in the box, and there only is one right answer. But it's just a way of helping to reinforce that central truth. So the final then aspect of our clubs that we're going to talk about is transitions. So most behaviour happens between activities, not actually during them. And this can be, as we mentioned earlier, the biggest trigger area and potential for challenging behaviour. So some of the strategies then to help deal with transitions. It can be helpful to make children aware of timings through verbal and visual warnings. So again, using that little countdown strip, just simply verbally warning 2 minutes left, 1 minute left, or using the sand timer like we mentioned before. We can also use consistent symbols or signals. It's helpful to visually signal an activity is finished. And using a symbol, like on the screen, clapping a pattern, or a certain musical cue, or a consistent line-up chant, whatever works for your children in front of you, all those cues can be really helpful. Another thing is a visual schedule. So a bit like the first and then card, a visual schedule with symbols and words just helps the child to know what is coming next, and just helps with those expectations and transitions. That can be really beneficial for some children and something they will be used to doing in school as well. Lastly, with transitions then, we want to keep them quick and clear. So depending on your setting, it can be helpful to use something like this, which is a rope for all children to hold on to. So we're not just signaling out 1 or 2 children. All children can hold on to this rope and follow each other, follow the group and move on through the next activity together. Another thing you can also do if you are changing locations or rooms is to colour code areas like this, whether that be the furniture in the area, posters in the area, the table, or colour for the chairs. You can have a blue area for snacks and a red area for workbooks, just to help children visually process where they are and what they're doing in that activity. So each of these practical tools we've mentioned are for typical elements of a 5-day club, a holiday Bible club, whatever that might be. And the idea is that they're designed to be simple, small changes that can have a big impact in our clubs. So as we wrap up this practical tools section, I want you to remember, structure reduces anxiety, clarity prevents frustration, consistency builds trust, and flexibility shows grace. Finally, something that might take a bit more organisation before your club, but is well worth considering and introducing. This is something called a buddy snapshot. This is just a simple form that can be completed by parents alongside initial consent forms. So where you might have a box to indicate that, yes, my child has additional needs. Sometimes they'll just state the need and not give you much more information. But there could be an option to fill in an additional form like a buddy snapshot, which gives insight into the child, things they enjoy, what they find difficult, or what might help them to feel calm and regulated. This information can then be shared with the leaders, especially those who have been designated to work one-to-one with a child, so we're not just guessing how to support them. And where appropriate, this might include a buddy bag with sensory items that the parent has indicated that the child likes, so things like noise-cancelling headphones or fidget toys. And this bag can stay with them throughout the club, and it just helps them to cope and to participate more fully in the club. So as we conclude, I don't know how much time we have for Q&A, but I really hope that these are some helpful and practical tools, just simple ways to make small changes in your club, but they really do have a big impact for all children. And we don't just simply want to manage behaviour, we want to create an environment where all children can thrive and feel included as we seek to make the gospel accessible to every child, including those with behavioural needs. So I'm going to pass back to James, and I don't really know how much time we have for Q&A, but...
A few minutes, yeah. Rebecca's got a microphone, and so if you have any clarifying questions or anything you want to follow up with, stick your hand up. There's a couple there, and Jenny can answer.
Please be kind.
It's not really sort of a question, but I work actually with we have a special needs youth club down in Spermview in Dungannon. It's called Caras, which I'm involved in. So it's this has been a very useful session. Again, it does take. It can be challenging at times, and one of the things I find, even just engaging with the parents whenever they come in, what sort of day have they had a good week, and sometimes that can give you an idea if they're going to like it or not, or if they're going to engage.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I'm asking, how good a night's sleep did they have, or have they ate this morning, or are they maybe feeling unwell? Things like that are all really helpful. So yeah, communication with the parents is really important. Thank you.
One at the very back there.
I sometimes use Makaton to teach the memory verse, but I have trouble finding a specific website. Where would you go to your YouTube channel, please?
Yeah, so you can just Google the symbols and they'll come up. So the actual Makaton symbol is like a blue background with a yellow M. So you know that that's the literal Makaton language. I probably should have had that listed, but there will be resources on YouTube or Google, and I also wouldn't necessarily, don't feel the pressure to find the specific Makaton, because if it's there, great, use it. But again, Makaton, it's great for everybody who understands it. But if we're trying to think about making every child included, actually to use a crook for the shepherd might be easier for every child in the room. So yeah, I know that's not very clear and very helpful, but you can pay for resources, but I'm not going to suggest those because I feel like that's not very accessible. But yeah, Google and YouTube would be your best.
Thank you.
Sorry.
And but another just quick question about the cam corner. What if you have 3 children needing it at once? How many, I don't know how many children can you put in the calm corner?
It just depends on the children that you have in front of you. Yeah, you'll know kind of the behavioural needs that are coming out with your children, and if it's a child who is really actually overstimulated by lots of children, if that child's already gone to the calm corner, you're not going to want to kind of cause them to have even more challenging behaviour because they're just already starting to regulate themselves. So I think it's just being mindful and kind of using a wee bit of common sense that if there is a child already there who will find that difficult, like maybe just using a simple other area in the church or wherever it is, or just stepping outside, like even for all our own children. Like I've heard the saying, if you take a child outside, it's like pulling a plug out and putting the plug back in again. Like it just resets them. So yeah, outside if you can't fit any more people in the calm corner. Anything else? Yeah, the front.
Is there a way that is good to encourage the other children in the group to be sensitive of the kids that maybe need more behavioural help so they're interacting with each other?
Yeah, like I think it's always important to encourage that all children interact with each other. But I also don't think it's helpful to draw attention to that child because that child will already feel quite isolated. And a lot of children who experience special needs or behavioural needs, an adult is their safe person. They'll connect with adults more than they will with children. So if you think of like a 1 or 2 year old, they don't actually know how to play with other children. And sometimes that's where our children with special needs are at. So whilst it's good to make other children in the club aware of those children, I think that's where using strategies that you're not just focusing in on that child, but you're implementing things across the entire club that other children might not even realise you've made those small changes. It takes the focus off the child. But I think having like a key adult with the children is best. And hopefully they'll not get upset by them getting more attention. But it is about including every child. It's not that we're trying to have more emphasis on children with special needs or give them special treatment. We're wanting all children to feel included equally. So hopefully that's helpful. Anything else?
Great. Well,
Yeah, I see
we'll
Andrew.
hand over to Andrew.
Thank you.